Oh, your mom is on.
Yes. Hello, mother. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. So today
And Eve.
we're going to focus a little about philosophy and theology. And the reason is because our second parsha of the doubleheader is talks a lot about blessings and curses. And the question that I want to ask is, are blessings and curses a form of bribery?
The issue of bribery was just before the Supreme Court, too. Now, how interesting.
Is this a form of God doing bribery to us? So that's the question. So let's first read the verses, which begin Parshat Bechukotai, and this is real life. I want to get real here, not bury things under the rug, but talk about what we feel, what we see around the world. Does the stuff that we read in the Torah actually work? Do we see it around us? So let's first read the blessings. So when will God send us blessings? I'm asking you.
If we go within God's ways.
Okay, so Charlie summed up the opening verses of the Chukotai. If you follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments, I will grant you rains in their season. You shall eat your fill of bread and dwell securely in your land. I will grant peace in the land. You shall lie down untroubled by anyone. I will give the land respite from vicious beasts, and no sword shall cross your land, etc. All these good things will happen if we follow Hashem's laws. And then, when will God send us punishments?
When we disregard his laws.
So Aaron summed up the next 26 verses, which start as follows in chapter 26, verse 14. But if you do not obey me and do not observe all these commandments, if you reject my laws and spurn my rules, I in turn will do this to you. And then there's a list. I will wreak misery upon you, consumption and fever, which cause the eyes to pine and the body to languish. You shall sow your seed for no purpose, for your enemies shall eat it. And goes on and on and on for the next 26 verses. So my question is, and often this is called Parashat HaTochecha, or the reproach. Meaning, this is the way that God is, on one hand, promising great things if they follow God's laws, and warning us there will be great punishments if we don't follow God's laws. But is there really a correlation between doing good and getting rewarded and doing evil and getting punished? When we look at the world around us, is there really a correlation?
You know, it's interesting that we're talking about this now, just at the time that Rabbi Kushner died. And he tried to explain that to us. Why do,
I didn't even know that. He just passed away.
He just passed away.
Yeah, and I'm going to bring, you'll see in a second. I'll bring a picture of his book, which I read many years ago, because I think we all know that it's a resounding no. There were thousands, if not millions, of pious Jews murdered and slaughtered, most recently in the Holocaust, but even before that, in pogroms and persecutions. And we know there's evil people who cheat, who lie, and they're successful. And we see it all around us. And so this seems that this demands an interpretation. In other words, those verses that we just read, they require us to be honest and say, okay, it cannot be the simplistic reading, because it's definitely not how the world works. You just think of all those million kids killed in the Holocaust. They did nothing wrong. And certainly millions of Jews who died in the Holocaust, many of them observant, God-fearing Jews. In wars, people die in wars regardless of their faith. And so, yes, this is the picture of his book, Natalie. You guys see it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so maybe I'll dedicate our lesson today to his memory. May his memory will be a source of blessing. And it's interesting that he called it when, not why. Because what I remember, and again, caveat is I read it many, many years ago. He didn't really explain why. I think this whole book was intended to, how can we deal with it? How can we cope with terrible loss, terrible tragedy? What insights can we gain? How can we continue living on? What purpose can we find in life when the person that we loved most, we lost, or something terrible happened to us? If I remember, he never tried to attempted to explain why this happens, but rather, and right, that's actually the title of his book. So I want to talk about that today, and in connection to the Parsha. How do we understand those verses?
The book of Job tried to tell us that sometimes there's no connection.
Right. And so the Eitz Chaim editors on our Parsha, the Chumash that we use, have several explanations. How does the modern man deal with this issue? So the first one they suggest is maybe this is a description of a future ideal world. This is what the world will be like when it truly becomes God's kingdom. Okay, I don't find that really convincing. It's not written in the future tense. The Peshat is that these verses are written to the Israelites back then in order to get them to behave properly back then, not in some future ideal world. Another explanation they bring, let's call it the community explanation. They say that when most members of the community follow God's ways, the community will prosper even if some innocent individuals suffer illness or injustice. So on the whole, they say, or this explanation goes, communities are better off when they observe God's laws. What do you think of that explanation?
I think communities are better off when they follow God's laws. I would agree with that, but that really doesn't answer the problem.
Okay, right. So even if there is a communal reward, it still doesn't answer on an individual basis. A person who followed God's laws, was righteous and pious, and then suffered terrible loss or was killed.
And if you believe that, then it gives you license to rub out community members who aren't up to snuff, because it is going to bring problems for everybody else.
Oh, that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
Very good.
So it's a dangerous even. You say
Yeah.
yes. Right. So, and also the problem with this is you're limiting God. God can't differentiate between those who were righteous and those who did evil. Why is it that way? It seems that you're limiting God in a certain way, which negates the idea of the all-powerful, all-capable God. This is like a human characteristic of a government that cannot sometimes has to do a curfew on a whole city because there's a lot of crime there, and they cannot stop the criminals individually, right? So they impose certain restrictions on the entire community. So are we saying God is? Yeah. So these are not very convincing arguments. Then they bring another argument, and they quote the Rambam's approach, and slowly we're going to get to the approach which I think is the most convincing approach. In his commentary on the Mishnah, the Rambam compares the blessings and curses to a teacher in a school. Teacher was teaching kids, and he's bribing the children to do their lessons with gifts of nuts and candies. And he says, in that era, the Israelites were not mature enough to do the mitzvot for the sake of doing the mitzvot, doing the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing, obeying the law for the sake of obeying the law. So God had to sort of give them the gifts of nuts and candies by promising all these good things that will happen, by promising the rewards and by threatening punishment. Let's see one quote. It's very interesting to read the whole explanation, but I'm going to read one quote from there. Or do we have a volunteer to read the quote from the Rambam? Neve, are you with us?
Yeah, I can read it. This is deplorable, but unavoidable, because of people's limited insight. A good person should not ask, if I perform these commandments, what reward will I get?
So, this is a very interesting approach, and also I think very appealing. You do it because it's the right thing. You're not going to get anything out of it. By even asking, what am I going to get out of it? You're turning it into something where you're only thinking about yourself, where you're elevating yourself. You're saying, well, what am I going to get out of this? A true believer in God does it because God commanded. He doesn't ask, what am I going to get out of it?
But
I might not get anything out of it.
but Shemai, it's not us that are asking. This is what it says in the Torah, right?
Right. So the Rambam will tell you
this.
that the Rambam will tell you that that's bribery. That's the kids. That's God. That's the teacher talking to the kids who cannot understand that they need to study for their own sake, for their good. So he gives them gifts. When they answer the right questions, he gives them a gift of nuts and candies. God is doing that in the Torah by promising the rain and the peace and the good life and the no vicious beasts, etc. All the stuff that we read. And conversely, the teacher has to threaten with expulsion, with calling the parents, etc., because the kids have a limited understanding. They don't understand they need to study because it's for their own good. So you have to take away the gifts, or the people who will fail the test will not go on the school trip. So God is kind of doing that in the Torah. But the true believer, or the believer who is on a higher level, so obviously there's nothing wrong with it because it's in the Torah, as you say, Aaron. So it wouldn't be correct to say that somebody who does it for those reasons is not doing it the Jewish way. So the Torah sort of allows it. The Torah says, yes, if that's what gets you to do it, then fine. I'm willing to put all these verses there. But comes the Rambam and says, don't take that as the goal. The goal is to do the mitzvot, not for any of those reasons, not for getting those promises from God.
So what you're saying, or what he said, Shemai, was that God lied to people to trick them into.
Does a teacher lie to the kids when he promises?
I don't know. I don't know.
So
yes, if a teacher says, if you study well, I'm going to give you candy, and he doesn't get, if they study well and he doesn't give them candy, he lied to the kids, right? Right? No?
Okay, so I see your point. Okay, so why is it not lying? So what if the kid thinks he got candy and therefore studied for the exam, but in the end it wasn't really candy? I think that's what the Rambam would answer. They thought, the Israelites, that they're going to get all these good things. And indeed, they did inherit the land of Canaan for a while, and there was a little bit of peace for a while. So in their minds, they got candy. But comes the Rambam and says, that's only because they're kids. They're not at a level where they can understand they have to worship God and stay away from the false gods for the right reason. So, and then, of course, the problem with that is once the kid discovers that it's not real candy, he's gonna think, like you say, that the teacher lied. And so the Rambam solves that by saying, no, you simply misunderstood. The teacher really wanted you to study because that's what's gonna get you advance you in life and be able to make a living. But he had to do that. He because if you were a kid, now that you have grown, you realize that all those candies that he gave out and turned out not to be candies, but when you were a kid, you thought they were candies, was only a trick to get you to do the right thing. And now you appreciate it. So right? Most kids, when they grow up and they realize, oh, those little gifts that he gave us weren't as what we thought, they'll still appreciate it because it got them to study. So it's kind of what the Rambam would answer, I think, about how to understand those verses. It's not lying, but it's written to the level of the people who received the Torah. But we, says the Rambam, are at a higher level. We can do it for the right reason, what's called lishma. So, and in rabbinic Judaism, we have these two approaches, lishma, for its own sake, and shelo lishma. And he uses those terms. The Rambam quotes those two options.
Yeah,
Okay.
also, it looks to me, I hate to say it looks like the two portions are out of order, Bahar and Bechukotai, because in the first portion talks about working the land and having Shemitah, letting the land rest on the seventh year and so on. So that's part of the Israelites then being independent of God, or more so in this context, growing up. So maybe that's part of the whole picture.
Okay, yeah, interesting. Now in that portion, again, there's a reward promised to them, but obviously that reward didn't always happen. In other words, let the land lay fallow, because I will reward you in the year following that. I want to show you.
Yeah, Israelites did not observe many of the years of Shemitah.
Right.
That's why there was exile,
So,
right?
and you should ask, should you ask, what are we to eat in the seventh year if we may neither sow nor gather in our crops? And continues the Torah, I will ordain my blessings for you in the 6th year, so that it shall be yield a crop sufficient for 3 years. But certainly that did not happen every year, every Shemitah year. When you sow in the 8th year, will still be, etc., etc. So again, this is candies. This is the Rambam would call these candies. God could not get the people to do it because of the mitzvah of Shemitah for its own sake. So he has to give them this sort of promise that it will work. And then when it doesn't work, the problem with that, the danger with that is when it doesn't work, they'll say, look, it didn't work. We're never going to do Shemitah again. But once you take the Rambam explanation, you say, no, don't really understand this promise here as a real promise. It's the candy that is not real candy. It's because of their limited insight, their limited ability to understand the whole concept of doing mitzvot for God. But it doesn't really have any manifestations in the real world. Okay.
Shabbai, something much worse could happen to the people if that promise were not fulfilled. They'd starve to death, right?
Yes. So you have to make sure you have in the reserves. In other words, take control of your destiny. That's a great point. I mean, isn't that the whole problem of Zionism, of why so many religious Jews were opposed to it? They said God will save us, God will bring the Mashiach. They were opposed to the Zionist movement. They stayed in Europe and they ended up getting killed in the Holocaust. The Rambam's approach would have been, no, don't believe what's in the Torah in a simplistic manner, that if you are a pious Jew and you're Shomer Shabbos, then God will eventually bring you to Israel and give you your kingdom and you'll live in peace. No, that's up to you to do. God doesn't owe you anything. Okay, so where does that leave us? So my grandfather liked this explanation very, very much and wrote several books, actually, about understanding the concept of reward and punishment. But before I bring him, we're going to listen to a story with Niv. And that will be a great example of this dilemma of how to interpret the idea of doing good, doing the right thing. Do you get a reward? Do you not get a reward? So what do you guys see in the picture?
Test, an exam.
Okay, so people were taking a test, and Niv was in fact taking a test. And this story is going to be about choices, about temptation, and about results. So Niv, are you ready to tell your story? Niv?
We lost.
Uh-oh. Don't tell me he didn't charge his phone. Oh, no. Maybe he doesn't have a connection. Okay. So I'll start the story. If he comes back on, then I'll let him continue the story. Okay. So he was taking a test. When it's an extracurricular program run by an organization that encouraged kids to study pages from the Talmud, a certain number of pages, and then get tested for them. And the person who would get the most points would win $500. And they tested them to see that they really learned those Gemara pages. And he knew, he was sitting doing the test, and he knew all the answers. And then he got to the final question, and he wasn't sure of it. And the final question was related to our parsha. It was actually about the blessings and curses, because the blessings and curses appear one more time in the Torah in the book of Devarim. And they asked, what is the difference between the blessings and curses in the Chukotai, in our parsha, and the blessings and curses in Kitavot? You see the slide where there's a comparison?
Yes.
Okay. And they said they actually gave them and they a difference, but the question was, oh yeah, no, that was the question. Now, first I'm going to ask you. You guys try to figure this out. In terms of the grammar, obviously it's not exactly the same words, but it's the same ideas, right? Let's look at Bechukotai. If you follow my laws and you keep the mitzvot tishmeru, v'asitam, and you do them, then the rewards, you will pursue, udaftem et oivechem, you will pursue your enemies, okay? And now I'm reading from Kitavo with a blue background. And if you will listen and hearken, etc., to God's laws, then uvau alecha kol habrachot, all these blessings will come unto you, vehisigucha, and the blessings will reach you. Now, in terms of grammar, look at both and tell me, in terms of singular and plural, do you see any difference?
At the beginning, the Hayam Shema Tishma, that's singular, Tishma.
Excellent. And the whole blessings and curses section is actually written in the singular. So don't be fooled by the uva'u. That's talking about the curses. They are plural. But alecha, alecha. Here, let me highlight.
Yeah.
Wait, is Neve saying something? Oh, he needs to tell the story now. He wrote me that
Hello.
his son died. Okay. I told him to be prepared. Okay. So you see this? Shamua tishma, that's singular. It's all singular. Uvau alecha, alecha, that's singular. If it would be plural, what should have it said?
Alecha.
Right.
Alechem.
Now, go to Bechukotai, our parsha. It's telechu. That's plural. That's plural. What else is plural? Tishmeru, plural. Vasitem, plural. Because if it would be singular, it would say Vasita. Uredaftem, again, plural. Because, so, in fact, the whole blessings and curses of Bechukotai is written in the plural. So let's write that down. That's in the plural, that's in the singular. Now, he remembered that one of them is in singular, one is in the plural, but he couldn't remember which is which. He couldn't remember, and you can't look. So he goes up to the teacher. He's still not on, right? Okay, oh well. And he says, I know the answer. I just can't remember. Can I look in the Torah and to know if it's singular in Kitavo and plural in the Chukotai or vice versa? And the teacher says, look, I'm not looking. Do whatever you want to do. $500 on the line. When he tells it, it's more dramatic. He thinks of all the things he can buy with $500. The teacher, the proctor, I think it was a proctor, it wasn't even the regular teacher. The proctor says, look, I don't know what, it's up to you. And he decides not to look it up in the Torah text. Okay, it's not an open book exam. I mean, certain exams, they define them as open book. Of course, there's no problem there, but this is not one of those tests. So he decides that Kitavo is plural and the Chukotai is singular, and that's what he writes on the test. And he got it wrong. So he did the right thing. And what was his reward?
Nothing.
$0 reward, or minus $500, which he could have had he done the wrong thing. He lost. So I
Or
love
one
this
of the
stuff.
other students could have seen him looking it up, and he would have been then made the fool because and called a cheater.
Oh.
So it could have been that
Okay.
too.
Okay, assuming though that he felt that he could have done it, the others were focused on the test. Assuming he could have gotten away with it, especially when the teacher just told him that he's going to look the other way. He did the right thing. Think of this, and he did it because it's the right thing. If you understand a simplistic model, then of course he just hurt himself. Then you would say he did the wrong thing. He should have done what will bring him the $500. Isn't that what the Torah promises? Do the right thing, you'll be rich. But he realized, no, that's the very simplistic. Maybe it was written that way because the Israelites couldn't understand what the Rambam understands and what we understand. That no, you do the right thing because it's the right thing. You don't do it because you can get rich. You don't do it because that will bring peace to the land. You don't do it because that will save you in times of trouble. If you want to make $500, go earn $500, but don't cheat in order to get the $500. So I want to conclude with my grandfather, Professor Shaul Leibovitz, who wrote books about this issue. Let's see a sort of summary in English. There's many books in Hebrew that he wrote. So there's The Faith of Maimonides. He talks a lot about this issue. There's in Hebrew, Leibovitz, Kofer o Ma'amin. So this troubled so many people that some of them called him a kofer. You know what a kofer is, a pikorus.
Denier.
It's so hard for some people to wrap their heads around this, that there really isn't reward and punishment, that it caused many but many really liked it, and he was always respectful of other opinions. But and there's many others. Let's watch a short video, just 2 minutes, in English, where it's explained his shita, and then we'll end with that. So let me share my screen.
Leibowitz claimed that a person's decision to believe in God, in other words, to obey him, defines or describes that person, not God. One result of this approach is that faith, which is a personal commitment to obey God, cannot be challenged by the usual philosophical problem of evil or by historical events that seemingly contradict a divine presence. When someone told Leibowitz that he stopped believing in God after the Holocaust, Leibowitz answered, "Then you never believed in God." If a person stops believing at
So he actually said a fuller sentence. He said, you never believed in God, you believed in the help of God, and God did not help. That's the full context of what he said. And as we know, if that's what your belief was based on, then yes, there was no help in the Holocaust.
After an awful event, it shows that he only obeyed God because he thought he understood God's plan, or because he expected to see a reward. But for Leibowitz, religious belief is not an explanation of life, nature, or history, or a promise of a future in this world or another, but a demand. Leibowitz believed in the separation of state and religion.
Okay, that's already a different issue. So I think we'll conclude with that, unless there are any questions.
I agree with him.
Okay, thank you, Joan. Any other interesting comments, remarks, questions?
Too complicated for me. I didn't.